Imagine you're about to retire. You're going to roll over one or maybe more 401ks into an IRA, and it's a lot of money. And your future retirement rests on how you handle this income and these investments. And you're nervous about it, and you're considering hiring an investment advisor to help you. Maybe it's someone you know, heck, maybe it's a family member, and they want to charge you 1.5% of your investments each year to manage your money. Is that a good deal or not? And how do you even go about evaluating whether that would be a smart move? My name is Rob Berger. I'm the founder of DoughRoller.net and the host of this podcast. Today, we're going to discuss that question. It's a question that a very close friend of mine asked me recently. I'm going to share with you his thoughts, my thoughts, and give you a framework in which you can understand just how destructive a 1.5% asset management fee can be to your wealth, to your future, to your well-being.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey everybody, hope you're having a great day. So I was driving home from work today, and this episode was just on my mind. It's all I could think about. And if for those of you that live in Northern Virginia, you'll get this. I'm driving down 66 inside the Beltway, and I always exit at 495, which is the Beltway, the outer belt. And I just blew right by my exit, just blew right by it, which is a big deal in Northern Virginia because just after the exit I normally take, traffic comes to a standstill for like 40 miles. I mean, it's just awful. And I blew right by the exit thinking about this podcast, and then took another half hour to get a couple of miles to get home. So it's been one of those days. But the podcast, this episode, arose from a conversation that I had with a very dear friend. He's about to retire. His name is Tom. My wife and I have known Tom and his wife and their children for many, many years, and just great people, hardworking people. Actually, I'd like to have his wife, Lisa, on the show. What an amazing story. I'm not even going to begin to tell you about her story. It's unbelievable. It's actually nothing to do with money. But everything to do with life and hope and restoration. A phenomenal story. Maybe I'll have her on the show. In any event, Tom was trying to reach me. I hadn't returned his call. I was in a coffee shop yesterday. He texted me. I finally called him. And the long and short of it is he's about to retire. He's in his, 60s. He's about to retire. And he's thinking he wants someone to help him manage his investments in retirement. It's obviously, there's a lot at stake. And he wants to make sure he's doing the right thing. All of the concerns that I'm sure you have, that I have, many of the concerns that we've talked about on this show many, many times. And he had a friend, actually, I think a person that prepares their taxes and who also is an investment advisor, and offered to manage his investments for 1.5%. And Tom, to his credit, immediately recognized this as a real problem, that is just way too expensive, but he wanted to get my thoughts on it, and so we talked. And I said, "Yeah, Tom, that's way too expensive." And as I thought about it, though, one of the challenges of talking about personal finance and investing that I find is talking about it in a way not just that people can understand, because I think we can all understand the numbers, but that we can, but it's more than that. That we really, really get it. That we really see and feel the impact of, in this case, a 1.5% investment advisory fee. I can break out the spreadsheet and say, well, if you invest for 40 years and you get 1.5% return, less because of these fees than you'd otherwise have gotten, it'll be a mountain of money. And yeah, we all intellectually, we get that. But I think sometimes it's hard to really translate that knowledge into action and to really appreciate just how destructive, frankly, a 1.5% asset management fee can be to your wealth. And so as I thought about it, I talked to Tom, it kind of just hit me. Well, I said, and Tom and I had this conversation. This is what I want to share with you today. When you think about retirement, the sort of the general rule of thumb we've talked about, I've had folks from Vanguard on the show to talk about this, is that as a general rule of thumb in your first year of retirement, you can take out 4% of your nest egg as income to live on for your first year of retirement. And then in each subsequent year, adjust it for inflation. And so, in our current inflation, in our current economy, it's going to be a pretty small adjustment. Inflation has been really, really low. So, in year two, it might just be a few $100s more. But whatever the inflation rate is, adjust it for inflation, and you have a reasonably good chance of having enough money in retirement. Notice I said reasonably good chance. There's no guarantees. For starters, we don't know how long we're going to live. So if you live to be 140, it may be a bit of a challenge, even if you live to be 100. But given reasonable assumptions and, reasonable stock market returns, you have a reasonable chance of having enough money in retirement. It's a 4% rule, right? Fair enough. Well, when we think about it in the context of paying an investment advisor 1.5% a year in fees, and we think about those fees in light of the 4% rule, forget the spreadsheet and the 40 years of investing and that actually, we'll get to that in a minute because I can't go an episode without a spreadsheet, but let's forget that for the moment. If you can take out 4%, and we'll just assume $1 million nest egg because it's a big fat round number. So 4% is $40,000. That's what you can afford to take out, right? Well, but wait a minute. If you've got an investment advisor, you don't get to keep that because you got to pay him or her 1.5%. Well, what's 1.5% of $1 million? Well, it's $15,000. That's over $1,000 a month. Think about that in the context of your budget, right? Over $1,000 a month, $15,000 a year. So when you withdraw that $40,000 in year one of retirement, you then have to stroke a check for $15,000 of it to give to your investment advisor. That's 37.5% of what you've just taken out to live on for the year. Isn't it amazing when you think of it that way? 1.5% doesn't seem that bad. I mean, goodness, a mortgage of 3.5 or 4% is, the deal of a lifetime. And, you can get car loans for 4 or 5%. 1.5%, it doesn't seem like much. But, when you're thinking about retirement, when you're thinking about living on a fixed income, when you're thinking about taking out maybe 4% a year, that puts this 1.5% in an entirely different light. And most people simply can't afford it. And so if you could try to live on $40,000 a year from your nest egg, perhaps along with Social Security and other sources of retirement income, maybe you have a pension, but taking that $40,000 out and then turning $15,000 of it over to an investment advisor, the math won't work. You just can't do it. Now, as I thought about this and was talking to Tom, by the way, as I said, to his credit, he knew immediately this 1.5% was a non-starter, but he kind of wanted to talk to me about it. And one of the things I suggested is that if he really wants someone to manage his money, I go back to Vanguard. It's 30 basis points, 0.3%. It's just 20% of what the fellow that he had talked to was going to charge him at 1.5%. So, that's always an option. But as we think about this 1.5% in the context of retirement, we can look at it a slightly different way. So when you think about the 4% rule, you think about it in terms of 4% of your nest egg when you're about to retire, right? This is the income I can take out, and maybe you come up with a budget for your retirement and make sure all the numbers work. But from a planning perspective, if you're a number of years away from retirement, you don't tend to think about a retirement budget yet, but you have some idea. You think, well, I'm going to need some amount of money, and oftentimes we'll kind of guesstimate that based on what we need now. You might make some adjustments. Hopefully the kids are out of the house, fingers crossed. Maybe you've got the mortgage paid off, but maybe you want to travel. You try to figure out exactly what you're going to need. And so if you came down to, again, using the same example, you say, well, I need $40,000 from my nest egg each year, beginning year one and adjusted for inflation. How would you go about calculating what you need? Well, of course, we know the answer now in this example is $1 million, but how's that calculation work? Well, again, it all comes back to your withdrawal rate. If you assume a 4% withdrawal rate, then you can take the annual income that you're going to need, $40,000, and in this case, just multiply it by 25. You say, well, fine, 40,000 times 25 is $1 million. But Rob, where'd you get the 25 from? Well, it's simple. Take your withdrawal rate and simply divide it into 100. So in this case, 4%, you divide that into 100 is 25. There you go. Take 25 and multiply it by the annual income that you need. and that will get you to the nest egg you need to achieve. And so as you think about that, if your withdrawal rate goes down, if you say, well, I'm not going to take 4% out, I need 40 grand. I need 40 grand, but I don't feel comfortable taking 4% each year. I'm only going to take 3%. Well, then you're going to need more than $1 million, because $1 million times 3% gets you to 30 grand, not 40 grand. So how would you figure that out? Well, you just take the 3%, divide it into 100, which is roughly 33, right? Multiply the 33 by what you need, 40,000, and I'm pulling up my trusty calculator because I can't do the math fast enough. 40,000 times 33 is 1.32 million. Now, that's really important in this conversation and my conversation with my good friend Tom. As the withdrawal rate goes down, the amount of nest egg that you need to produce the same amount of annual income goes up, right? Just like in the example, if you can withdraw 3%, your nest egg goes from $1 million to 1.32 million. Well, let's apply that back into this example where an investment advisor is going to charge you 1.5%. If we assume you can take out 4% a year, again, that's the sort of the industry standard assumption. You can argue with it, and then sometimes I do, but we'll use it for today's podcast. But you can't keep it all, right? You can't keep it all because you're going to pay your investment advisor 1.5%. That means your after fee withdrawal rate is what? Well, 2.5%, right? 4% minus 1.5% to your friendly investment advisor leaves you with 2.5%. Well, we can use the same formula. What do we need if we still need 40 grand a year, but we can only keep the 2.5% that we take out because we got to give 1.5% to our advisor? What kind of nest egg do we need? I mean, if we keep all 4% and we're trying to generate 40 grand, we just need $1 million, right? $1 million times 4%, 40 grand. But we're only going to get to keep 2.5%. Well, it's the same formula. Take 100 and divide it by 2.5, right? That's pretty easy. That's going to be 40. And then multiply 40 by $40,000. What do we need? I know you guys are ahead of me on this one. Even if you're driving your car, you've probably already done the math on this. $1.6 million. And let's just, it's unbelievable. 1.5% seems so stinking small. But when you stop, when you do some sort of second level thinking about this, it's kind of like in chess. If you try to look beyond the next move, which sometimes I'm not so good at, but I try. It's amazing the compounding effect of small numbers. We started with this lousy 1.5% fee. And now, if we're assuming we want $40,000 of income in year one of retirement and then adjust it for inflation thereafter, that 1.5% means that we don't need $1 million. We need more. We need $1.6 million to retire. Unbelievable. And if you don't believe the math, 1.6 million times 2.5%, it's going to get you that 40 grand. You can do the math yourself. To me, it's just mind-boggling, but it's one of the reasons that I preach incessantly in this podcast about fees and why fees matter. Now, I should say that even the fees you might pay Vanguard matter. I mean, 30 basis points, 0.3%, is a heck of a lot better than 1.5%, right? We don't even need to break the spreadsheet out for that. But we still ought not think that it's insignificant. So again, if we start with the 4% withdrawal rate, even if we hire Vanguard, we're going to give them 30 basis points. So that leaves us with 3.7. All right, well, let's do the same math. 100 divided by 3.7 gets us to 27 and change. Multiply that by our 40,000 that we need in year one of retirement. And it still raises the nest egg. Obviously not nearly as dramatic as our friendly investment advisor that wants to charge us 1.5%, but it still raises our nest egg from $1 million to roughly 1.08 or $1,080,000. Not insignificant. Now think about that. 3 basis points, if we pay it to Vanguard and we still want that 40 grand and we're assuming a 4% withdrawal rate, we need $80,000 more saved up to retire than we do if we manage our investments on our own and keep the full 4% for ourselves. Now, I do the math here. I think Vanguard is an excellent option. I know a lot of people want someone who's got the expertise and the experience to help them manage their investments, and I am not at all trying to discourage folks. And I even told my friend Tom, I think Vanguard is an excellent option, far less expensive. I've told my wife, honey, if I get hit by a truck, call up Vanguard and have them manage all of our investments, because it's not something she's going to feel comfortable doing, and absolutely do it. But even at 30 basis points, it has a significant impact on the numbers, and we ought to recognize that. We ought not to discount it. It's the way in which we make informed decisions. But this podcast today, this show really resonated with me. I hope it does with you too, because these seemingly small numbers, they have a big impact on our lives and how we can live. In this case, in the context of retirement, frankly, I think it's, and I have friends that do. I have friends that are investment advisors that charge 1.5%, and publicly, I would never, call them out, but privately, I'll tell them, I think you're ripping people off. You ought not charge 1.5%. I think the business has changed. It's no longer money well spent. I don't think 1% is money well spent. I mean, particularly when Vanguard is charging 30 basis points, you have automated investment services like Wealthfront and Betterment and Wise Banyan. Wise Banyan's free. Wealthfront and Betterment offer a few more features, but they're really inexpensive. So in that kind of environment, I just don't see a reason to pay 1%, let alone 1.5%. Now, for those of you nowhere near retirement, I did think I should do a little bit of spreadsheeting for you, just to get a feel for this. And so I made an assumption with a 1.5% fee. When you get to retirement, man, the 1.5%, you feel it. It's like, holy cow, I'm going to take 40 grand out and I got to give my advisor 15,000. I feel that. That hurts. That's the kind of pain that causes us to make smart decisions. But when you're 10 or 20 or 30 years away from retirement, we don't feel the pain of investment fees quite the same way, because we're not pulling money out and the fees just get deducted and we go about our day. We got other things to worry about, let alone, our investments, although, some of us maybe keep an eye on them more than others, but, the pain isn't there. But the impact is huge. And I want to give you just a real quick example. If we assume someone's investing $15,000 a year, that's still less than the 401k limit, which is $18,000 this year. We're in, for those that listen to this podcast years from now, we're in 2015. Let's imagine you invest that. We'll ignore inflation for this purpose. It doesn't really matter. So we'll keep the investment at $15,000. We won't increase it. And we'll assume you invest it for 40 years. And in one instance, you'll earn 8%, and in the other, you'll pay an investment advisor 1.5%, and so you'll only earn 6.5%. Well, the numbers are huge. The difference is if you're paying your investment advisor, you'll end up with $2.6 million. If you do it on your own and you don't pay the 1.5%, you end up with almost $3.9 million. We're talking almost $1.2, $1.3 million difference. The numbers are huge. And then if we bring it back down to reality, we say, okay, well, let's say we've got those two nest eggs and we're ready to retire and we can take out 4% the first year. What's the difference? Well, if you've been paying your investment advisor for 40 years and you've got $2.6 million as a result, 4% in year one is $105,000. If you haven't hired an investment advisor and you've got almost $3.9 million in the bank when you retire and you take out 4%, well, you can take out $155,000. So that little 1.5% multiplied over 40 years, and then you're ready to retire. It lowers what you can live on by a third. It takes $155,000 down to $105,000. Now, I want to finish off with one thing to kind of think about. A lot of investment advisors will tell you, look, don't listen to the chucklehead Rob on the DoughRoller podcast, but stupid name for a podcast show anyway. What you really need to care about are not the fees. He's totally misleading you, they may tell you. What you need to care about are your returns after fees. It's your after fee return that matters, not how much you're paying me. If you're paying me 1.5%, but I'm beating the market by 2%, then you've come out ahead, and we've outsmarted the DoughRoller and all of the people that have a similar view as he does, and you're up 0.5% on the market. Well, I can't argue with the math. But of course, as we know, investment advisors can't do that. We just study after study after study after study after study shows that over the long term, the vast majority of investment advisors, the vast majority of actively managed funds will not beat the market. And those that do, the odds of beating it by 1.5%, forget about it. Is it possible? Well, you could look at Warren Buffett. So I don't know, maybe you know a Warren Buffett and you've got a Warren Buffett-like person managing your money. And if you do, good luck and Godspeed. But for the rest of us, it's just not realistic. And by the way, the investment advisor that tries to convince you of that sort of logic will not guarantee the results. Ask them. So, well, you seem pretty confident. Yeah, I am confident. Wow. Well, will you guarantee that we'll beat the market by 1.5% or whatever his or her investment advisory fee is by 1%? Will you guarantee that? Of course, they're not going to guarantee it. So, I guess it's buyer beware. I really was grateful to have the conversation with Tom. As I said, he was ahead of me on this already. He already knew that this was sort of a non-starter. He just wanted to talk it through. But the real key is when you look at it in the context of either retirement income that you're going to need, man, that 1.5% gets huge. Or if you look at it over a lifetime of investing, that 1.5% is huge. I've said it once, I'll say it again. Investment fees matter. We absolutely have to keep them as low as possible. Well, there you go. I'm going to step down off my soapbox for today. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Rob, that caused you to miss your exit on the freeway? Really? You need to get a life. Yeah, I know. I'm sitting in my basement talking into a microphone. Of course I need to get a life. Hey, hope you enjoyed the show. If you have any questions or think I'm an idiot or have a topic you want me to cover or have a question, shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. Remember, you can support the show financially. Just go to DoughRoller.net/support. If you already have supported it financially, or if supporting it financially is the absolute last thing you would ever do, that's okay too. There's other ways you can support the show. You can leave a review on iTunes. That would be great. You can just tell your friends and family about the show. That would be wonderful as well. And finally, if you want to leave me a voicemail message, which I love those because I can play them on the show and people get to kind of get a sense of who you are. Just leave your first name, no identifying information. Ask your question or topic or whatever you want me to cover. A number of people have done that. I've played one. I've got more coming up. But you can do that at DoughRoller.net/voicemail. And as I've said before, you can listen to the message you recorded. If you don't like it, you can scrap it and start over. When you get to a message you like, you can then hit the send button. Would love to hear from you that way. And finally, the show notes for this episode, I'm kind of getting back to leaving the show note numbers, particularly for people that listen to this, down the road. This is the 178th episode of the DoughRoller Money Podcast. So you can get the show notes, which will include all of the numbers I've talked about and the math that I kind of, went through fairly quickly. Just go to DoughRoller.net/podcast178. That will redirect you to the article that accompanies this podcast where you can see all the numbers. Hey, hope you have a wonderful day. Until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.